Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You are listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Meshni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Australia's only radio program that is totally dedicated to the Palestinian cause in English language. In today's episode, we will be talking to Dr. Rev Stephen Sizer. Stay with us and enjoy the episode. Dr. Rev Stephen Sizer is the director of Peacemaker Trust. He was ordained in 1983 and was appointed Vicar of Virginia Water in 1997, where he served for 20 years until 2017. Dr. Sizer has a very strong profile in interfaith human rights, and as an academic, as an author, and even as a freelance photographer. We were honored and delighted to invite him to the studio, and Robert spoke with him in an interview that we will put over 2 episodes. So stay with us. Coming up is part 1 of Robert's interview with Dr. Rev Stephen Sizer.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and listeners. I'm so honoured to be joined by Dr. Rev Stephen Sizer today, who's travelling around talking about Christian Zionism. Now, Christian Zionism is something that I didn't realise was so well known and so big in America. And I was hoping that you might be able to tell us the size, but also what Christian Zionism is.
Sure. Christian Zionism is the elephant in the room in many ways, because it is the Middle East conflict and the reason why there's such a close relationship between Israel and the United States, why, for example, you won't find a single serving senator or congressman in the States critical of Israel, because it's political suicide, is inexplicable without factoring in the support Israel has within the Christian community. Again, we tend to think Zionism is a Jewish political concept. It's actually a Christian concept. It's 9 out of 10 Zionists in the world are Christians.
And that's something that's not discussed enough, I think. So
the history of Zionism is largely the history of Christian restorationists who believed in the 19th century that God was going to bring the Jews back to Palestine as a Christian nation, and it was therefore the role of the church, particularly in Britain, to some extent America, to help facilitate that. So Christian restorationism preceded Zionism by at least 50 years, and it was British politicians. You've probably figured out I've got a British accent. It was British politicians who facilitated that because it coincided with British aspirations politically to control the Middle East. We were fighting France, then we were fighting Germany to control the trade routes to the colonies in India and Africa. So Palestine was strategic. So Christian Zionism today is simply Christians who believe it's their responsibility to support the state of Israel. Now, I'd want to distinguish between our concern and care for, respect for Jewish people, and it's very important we repudiate anti-Semitism or racism, but also recognize that Zionism today is a form of racism, because what Israel is perpetrating...
Well, it's not a form, it is racism.
Yeah, the last 40, 50 years, Israel has created a state that preferences one race over others. Exclusive healthcare system, exclusive education system, accommodation is segregated. 90% of the land of Israel can only be settled by Jews. So it's a deeply divided society, and to have Christians support that for religious reasons is deeply troubling, hence why I'm here talking to you.
So when we say they support Israel regardless, and I know that in some of they prophesise that God gave the land to the Jews and that they are the chosen people. Now, this is something that I have become relatively new to, but I travelled to Palestine not long ago, and I asked a lot of Jewish people, the Israelis, why are you here? And this was in Hebron. And I got told, and with a vehement in the eyes, very, very hard, that God gave us this land. Now, these people believe it. Unequivocally, they believe it. But tell me about the chosen people and the ideology behind it, because Christians are saying that the Jews have to go to Israel because God said so. How does this work? Because I thought religion was actually all-inclusive.
Yeah. It's a conviction that is not exclusive to Zionists. If you go back in history, you'll see how the early settlers in America believed they were the chosen people and God had given them the land, and that justified forcibly removing or wiping out the North American Indians. Dare I say it, the same theology was used here in Australia at some point in history. It was true in Africa, South Africa. Before the 60s, the Dutch Afrikaner Church justified apartheid theologically. So chosenness is not an exclusive reserve of Zionists, but it's probably the last remaining country in the world where religion is used to justify the occupation of land and the theft of land from the indigenous people, hence the Palestinians. So I think that the force with which Zionists claim to be the chosen people and claim the land are based on divine right is an indication of their guilt and their insecurity and their fear. They've got to justify it based on promises that they believe God made 4,000 years ago. I've spent quite a bit of my life deconstructing that theology biblically, because if we're going to change the paradigm in the Middle East, if we're going to be part of the solution rather than the problem and help bring justice and peace between Jews and Palestinians, we've got to treat them both equally, and we've got to deconstruct a theology that justifies racism and justifies ethnic cleansing.
Isn't that what religion's about, though, that we're all God's people? We're supposed to be equal?
Completely. What I've done in my books and in my presentations, and as others have, is look back at the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures to look at these concepts of chosenness and land. And if we take them one at a time, just take the land, for example, the promises in the Bible about the land emphasize that the land belongs to God and that his people, whoever they are tenants. And, you know, there's a difference between leasehold and freehold. Yeah. God was giving them leasehold, not freehold, but they assumed they were being given freehold. They got the land. No, they didn't.
And that's for everybody.
They were aliens and strangers, and their residence in the land, the blessings they enjoyed, was conditional on faithful obedience. You obey me and you can stay, rebel and you're out. And it happened over and over again.
That's fair enough. That's actually fair enough.
You know, so the land was never given to the Jewish people as an everlasting inheritance, full stop. The land was to be shared. And the irony is, over and over again, in the Bible, they were told to share the land. You know, as a Christian theologian, when something is said once in the Bible, I accept it. When something is said twice in 2 verses, it's there for emphasis. But when God says something 3 times in 3 consecutive verses, he's saying something special.
He's meaning business.
Exactly. and let's just give you one example. Ezekiel is a prophet writing to God's people in exile and promising they can return to the land as long as they're good boys and girls. And he says in Ezekiel 47, you're to distribute the land according to the tribes of Israel. Okay. You are to allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and the foreigners residing among you. You are to consider them native-born Israelites. Along with you, they're to be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. And so he says that 3 times, share the land, share the inheritance with the foreigners in the land. So if you want a solution today, 2-state or 1-state, the Bible actually affirms the 1-state solution. Treat everyone the same, equal citizenship. That's how it is here in Australia. That's how it is in the UK. You're born somewhere, you get equal rights, not based on your colour or your religion. When we come to chosenness, they've turned it into a noun rather than a verb. You have to say chosen for what? God had chosen...
Well, that's a very good question.
God had chosen the Jewish people in the Old Testament. By the way, that was an inclusive term. It wasn't a racial term. It was God's people of different nationalities were called Jews, but they were called to be his witnesses, his light to the Gentiles, to show what worship of God and obedience of God would look like in your marriages, in your relationships, your ethics, your work, and so on. So they were chosen to be a role model for other nations. But they turned it into a noun.
Well, they're not a role model now. He would be very, very disappointed.
I'm chosen. It's like saying I'm special.
Yep.
I'm British, I'm white. That's racism. So when we look at that in the Bible, we see that God's people is always inclusive, and that they were there to serve rather than to take. They were there to give rather than to take. And in the New Testament, the word chosen is only ever used of those who acknowledge Jesus. So at a Christian level, if we're talking theologically, chosen is never used of the Jews in the New Testament.
So it's any person that recognises Jesus will be
the chosen,
part of the chosen.
And they are the inheritors, it says in Romans and other passages, are the inheritors of the promises God made to Abraham. So the children of Abraham are those who acknowledge the God of Abraham.
But they've taken this to a whole new level.
It's nothing to do with race. It has a great deal to do with faith.
Because I know that, so Christian Zionism, going back to that, they're teaching something fundamentally different than that, aren't they? They are actually teaching. Now, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's a very, very dangerous thing to be teaching people, especially their children, that you're better than others. This land is ours because God gave it to us. That's going to be a very, very hard thing to break down the track. Now, they are teaching this, aren't they? The Christian Zionists plus the Jewish people in Israel are teaching this as well.
Yes. We recently in the UK celebrated, I wish we'd repented, but it was a marking of the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration.
Disgusting that she got up and did that.
It was a declaration that Britain promised the land to the Jews while promising to protect the rights of the
indigenous population.
We called them the non-Jewish, and it's always worrying when we call anyone non-something. And it didn't include the word political, it said the civil rights. But we'd never intended to keep that promise because Britain and France had done a deal in the First World War, the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, that we were going to keep the land for ourselves. And in fact, in a letter that Balfour wrote to Lord Curzon about 2 years later, he said, we never intended to share the land with the Arabs. We don't trust them. He said, Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or ill, is in age-long traditions of far more profound thought than the needs or sentiments of the 900,000 Arabs who now inherit that land. And then he said this, he said... Britain has made no statement of fact, which is not in the letter, they've always intended to violate. So he was admitting that they'd intended to violate. So in Britain, we were calling on the British government to say sorry, to say we delivered one half of the Balfour Declaration, but not the other half. And we actually modelled our campaign on the sorry campaign from Australia. When, it was a long history of a campaign that eventually got your Prime Minister, your government to say we're sorry to the Aborigines. We try to use that and say we've got to do the same. But our government was so in bed with the Zionist lobby that they were not prepared to do that. They were celebrating that they had helped create the state of Israel.
As did Turnbull. He's celebrating everything that's going on as well. And so it's a disgrace to hear it. What was the feedback like though when you're trying to get that? Were you labelled anti-Semitic?
That's been thrown at many of us, politicians and church leaders. You take that as given. But we've had a number of key meetings in London marking the Balfour Declaration, and we've had politicians identify and support the campaign. But there's no possibility of the British government budging on this. It's ironic because Britain, along with Europe and the United States and Russia and the EU and the UN, all recognise the two-state solution. But when it comes to the application of that in recognising a Palestinian state, they won't do that. So it's hypocritical. It's entirely inconsistent. It's a sham.
Tell me, with Christian Zionism, how big a movement is it? Because I'd heard little bits and pieces of it, and I thought, yeah, you hear about it, but how big is it?
Well, there was a survey recently in Christianity Today where they surveyed Americans on their attitude to Israel, and they found that 25% of Americans regard it as their religious responsibility to support Israel. So 25% of Christians in America, minimum. When you look at the white Americans, it was 63%. Which explains why there's been such enthusiasm for Donald Trump. Christian Zionists themselves and their organizations claim between 20 and 100 million supporters in America.
Between 20
and 100 million. So when you talk about...
And that's out of 330-odd million in America.
When you talk about Zionism, 9 out of 10 Zionists are Christians. It's not a Jewish system. It is largely a Christian conviction and it's dressed up theologically. So, you mentioned Armageddon earlier. A colleague, Gershon Gorenberg, a Jewish theologian, he wrote a book called The End of Days. He says, the problem with your theology is that we Jews are Act 3 in a 4-act play.
Wow, okay.
We're not around, we get nuked.
Yeah.
Which is why many of our Jewish friends are quite reluctant to welcome or embrace Christian Zionism because it's a poison chalice.
So with the move, is that something that we should be worried about? I mean, from we always talk about the Muslims have a ideology of certain things, and they're the ones that totally in the media get.
There are different strands within Christian Zionism, and you will find many, if you like, sincere, simple Christians who've been taught through their pulpits or through books they've read or the influence of television evangelists that somehow they're receiving blessing, material blessing, because they support Israel. So it's a form of prosperity gospel. Keep paying your dues and God will look after you. God will bless you.
You can't convert that, can you? I mean, that sort of belief is...
Well, I try to by taking them back to the Bible and showing that deconstruct it theologically, biblically, and it doesn't take a lot. It's like a balloon of hot air. You only need one pin to burst a balloon.
Yeah.
But within the movement, there are those who are much more aggressive militarily and politically, and people like John Hagee is one example. He said recently, the United States must join Israel in a preemptive military strike against Iran to fulfill biblical prophecy and speed the return of Christ. Now, that's no different to ISIS, no different to religious Zionist settlers who believe that the Messiah won't come by himself. We should bring him by fighting. It's apocalyptic, it's confrontational, it demonizes Islam, and there's a deep, deep distrust within Zionism, Christian Zionism, for the United Nations, international law, because they believe their Bible or their interpretation of the Bible trumps law, international law. So it's a form of exceptionalism, and it's just simply in defending apartheid. It's justifying apartheid on religious grounds.
So when we have these intifadas, they're saying, look, this could be the time. Things are starting to happen. There's going to be deaths. It could be the coming. Let's kill more Palestinians or kill more Christians. I mean, it doesn't matter, does it?
No. What they tend to do is to deflect criticism, because when this movement began in the 19th century, colonialism was the primary export from Europe. We were colonizing the world. We were introducing these concepts.
It was the done thing, wasn't it?
It was the done thing. The natives, if you like, were uncivilized. They needed civilizing, and so had Zionism, with British and American support, been able to create a state in the 1880s, 1890s or earlier, then it probably would have got away with it because they would have wiped out the Palestinians by then.
Of course.
But the First World War intervened, then the Depression, then the Second World War. So coincidentally, South Africa declared independence in 1948 and Israel was declared a state in 1948. But they were like children that were born late. And by the time they got their version of Zionism, they were implementing it in terms of segregation, forcing the Palestinians into their Bantustans. Most of the world had turned against apartheid, had turned against that form of racism. It's so explicit in your face. So they have a hard time defending it. So they use the Bible, exceptionalism. But again, if you're trying to deflect criticism, the most obvious way is to make your opponents appear worse than you are. Hence,
anti-Semitism.
If you can't convince someone, then you demonize them. Hence, you are accused of anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, associating with terrorism.
Just on that, then we're touching on anti-Semitism, and I know that you've been labelled an anti-Semite, and you get attacked quite a bit. And I think this week you've had a few people having a go. Tell us about that and what they've done, but also how it's affected your work.
I think the first time you're accused of anti-Semitism in print, it's a shock, and it's like being exposed. It's like having 666 on your forehead, and everyone wants to avoid you.
So you can understand the Christians not wanting to be labelled that.
Melanie Phillips, who's a far-right journalist in the UK, wrote an article in The Spectator. Boris Johnson was the editor.
Oh, fantastic.
And the front cover had a picture of an Anglican priest, collar and everything, with a little church behind him, burning an Israeli flag, and it was called Christians Who Hate the Jews. And it was a critique of my bishop, John Gladwin, me, the Bishop of Jerusalem, and a few others. But she was trying to rubbish us. The strategy that they use... I've experienced 4 of the 5 levels. The first level
is that all? So you got one to go.
That's one I don't want to experience. The first one is to try and influence you, to buy you. So you get invited as a clergyman to come to the Holy Land, all expenses paid, subsidised tour, meet the people, and you buy the Israeli script so that you'll go back and take other groups and repeat that with your tour groups.
So you did this?
I did this. I repent. I did that. I confess, I mean. And but you only have to get off the bus and talk to a few Palestinians and you realise there's another script. Yeah. They're not terrorists. They're not pickpockets. They're human beings. They love their kids. And actually, they are the Christians. Most of the Christians in Israel, Palestine, are Palestinians. And when you realise they've been demonised and they've been ostracised and they've been hidden behind walls, you feel stupid having your little communion service on the Sea of Galilee when you could have worshipped with them on Sunday in a real Christian church with real Christians.
And that was something that dawned on you.
Yeah. So I began to question it, and so I
thanks to their tour,
I stopped taking the subsidies.
So the tour helped.
Yeah,
converting you back to the.
Well, that's it. When you see the truth, it's hard to unsee it. Which is why they don't want you to talk to
normally
Palestinians.
They don't. I know when I was there, I saw the buses go through and they wouldn't stop.
95% of tour groups have no contact with the local Christians. I did my master's thesis looking at the ethics of pilgrimages. But when I began to write articles questioning the Zionist script and the agenda, then you get the second level, which is intimidation. And so you get the emails, the phone calls, the criticisms, articles critical of you.
And these are big numbers, so it's orchestrated?
It is orchestrated.
Yeah.
People in the Hasbara movement get paid to write letters, to complain about you, to phone you up. So people would stand up in the middle of presentations and shout me down, accuse me of all manner of things. They try and shame you. And now, if that intimidation doesn't work, then they've got to isolate you. That's the third element. And so they'll intimidate others. So they went for my publisher, they went for some of the charities I was working with. One guy wrote to all of my church leaders and warned them that they should leave the church or that they should get rid of me because I was an anti-Semite, or that I was in league with the Iranians, or
really?
Yeah.
Terrorist supporter.
Yeah, the works. So they will, and so my bishop would get letters. There was one occasion I said to him, "You probably get letters like this all the time about clergy." He said, "Well, actually, I don't."
Well, this was the first one, so it was a welcome. Okay, yeah.
And so they will intimidate others. So you get invited to give talk somewhere, and then you'll get disinvited, and it's because they put pressure on them to disinvite you. I did.
That's got to be disheartening. I mean, that has to be disheartening.
It's costly. I was in New Zealand a few years back, working with Tear Fund. Tear Fund took a hit. People stopped supporting Tear Fund because they'd invited me. Laidlaw College had a donor pull money out because they'd invited me. So it's costly if you stand with people for justice, peace and reconciliation. World Vision, Tear Fund, many organisations, Christian Aid have suffered for that. So that's the third level. They will isolate you by intimidating others. Now, if that doesn't work, the fourth level is incrimination. They'll accuse you of criminal behaviour. So one occasion I gave a talk in our local university, a Christian union. I was invited to speak, and I just happened to leave some leaflets that were advertising my books. And, some of them were left. Students leave bits of paper behind. Next day, knock on the door, 2 police officers. Did you put this out in the university? I said, actually, I was invited to give a lecture in the university, and I obviously gave out some leaflets about my books. Oh, sorry. Off they went. But complaints are made, and then they'll say, he's been investigated by the police. And then, so they will use that against you. Wow. I'll give you one other example. Wow. There was this guy who was targeting us for years anonymously. He set up a website, Seismic Shock.
Oh, so you know who he is now?
I do now, but I'll tell you why. Seismic Shock, to try and take out Sizer. And for years he was blogging about me. It was anonymous. The police had no idea who he was, because this is harassment. This is stalking. It's very clear. And but they couldn't do anything because they couldn't work out his IP address and so on. And then a friend who was a bit more sophisticated with internet observed that an IP address was monitoring his website and mine, and then in the middle of the night, and then they'd be writing an article about us on this website. So there was a correlation. We tracked it down to a university in London, in the north of England.
This is you and your friend doing this?
Yeah. So I got the IP address, and I figured out the phone number that was linked to that location. Wow. And so I thought, I'll email the guy, so he knows I know who he is.
Oh, that's
So I simply said, hi, this is Stephen. I just want you to know I'm praying for you. And that's all I said, because I thought that should be enough.
Absolutely.
I got an email back from a guy saying, thank you so much, but why are you praying for me? And I thought, well, I better elaborate a bit. So I said, well, this computer's been used to harass me, and I just wanted the guy to know, I'm assuming it's you, that I'm praying for you, hoping I'm going to convict him. He said, well, actually, you've come through to the security department of Huddersfield University. I think it was Huddersfield. I can't remember. Or Leeds. And so I told him what was happening. He said, this is serious. He said, you need to tell the police and we'll investigate. So they tracked down the computer. They identified who'd been using it those hours. They confiscated the hard disk. They informed the police who it was. The police visited this gentleman. And the police told me they had visited a gentleman and they had warned him to stop doing it, and he apologised, promised to do it. I thought, fantastic, my ordeal is over.
It's all done, we don't need to worry.
Then a Joseph Weissman, that's his name,
obviously the Joseph,
outs himself on the internet and accuses me of using the police to suppress freedom of speech. So I'm the guilty one. You see, you turn it right round. He thought I knew who he was. I didn't. So he thought I better out myself. And so he came out fighting. So I'm the guilty one. I didn't put the police on him. I didn't know who he was. No. But that's how they will try and incriminate
So what was the outcome? Did he get
he was warned, but he kept going.
Or?
Eventually, bless him, he did email me through an intermediary, and he wanted to apologise because he'd written to the leaders in my church anonymously. But he wanted my forgiveness, and I said, I've forgiven you.
Nice.
I said, I've forgiven you years ago.
You were praying for him.
But if you're serious about this, you need to be explicit and go public. Since you were public criticising me, it's no good just emailing me. You've got to go public and acknowledge what you did, and he hasn't done that yet. Because if you've done something wrong publicly, and you're sorry, then you need to let people know you're sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the fourth level. The fifth level, I know you're dying to know what the
fifth
level
level is.
I
I wasn't sure whether I should ask.
That's either incarcerate or it's liquidate, and I can't find an I that meets with liquidate. But yeah, they take people out. They do.
This has been Dr. Rev Stephen Sizer speaking to Palestine Remembered, and we will have a few more minutes with this interview next week. And the very last piece or segment on this episode is a snippet, 30 seconds, from President Mahmoud Abbas's speech, especially the part when he was speaking about the full bias of the American administration to Israel and on the issue of settlements. Just in case you missed it, the Americans regard settlements as legal, and this was said by more than one official, the first of whom was their ambassador in Tel Aviv. David Friedman, who said that the Israeli settlers are building on their land. This son of a dog building on the land, he is a settler from a settler family. This is the U.S. ambassador in Tel Aviv. What should we expect? With this, we've come to the end of this week's episode of Palestine Remembered. Thanks for being with us. Remember to tune in next Saturday, same time, 9:30 in the morning. Until then, this is Nasser, Robert and Yusuf wishing you the best of time and salam.